SEO is AEO. Welcome to the show, Dateme, Martha and Robin.
Thank you.
That's good. That's a funny one.
I hope we're not going to have to repeat that, but
No, I'll do it again at the end
okay.
now. Lovely to meet you all. We're here to talk about knowledge graphs and structured data and unstructured data even. How do each of you relate to the knowledge graph?
Yes, I think my focus is a lot on common sense knowledge graphs. So basically, your knowledge graph is one level, but common sense knowledge graph is taken it to the next level, which means the data, the relationship between entities is more fine-grained, while knowledge graph is more coarse-grained. So I'll give you an example. So the schema, when it comes to knowledge graph, the schema is quite simple, but common sense knowledge graphs, it can be very complex. So one of the biggest common sense knowledge graphs out there is called ConceptNets. So conceptnets.com is a free tool. So what is basically, you put in an entity and it tells you the relationships. Example, you can say skiing is a winter sports. You can say the effects of skiing is a broken leg. So that means if someone is skiing, you have a tendency to have a broken leg. So common sense knowledge graphs is an emerging field. It's basically knowledge graphs with a bit more common sense. And it's useful for for search engines, for dialogue systems. So from our school of thought, it's basically having knowledge graphs and adding a bit of common sense to knowledge graphs.
That's brilliant. Well, I like that. I've never heard about this before. Had you heard about that before?
No, so...
And you're structured data lady.
Oh, sure. So Martha van Berkle, I'm CEO at Schema app, and so we really help people structure data into the common vocabulary called schema.org so that they can inform their knowledge graph. So most people think of it as like an SEO tactic or a strategy, whereas I really think of it as like a way to manage your marketing data layer. That if you actually build those relationships properly, you actually are building a knowledge graph. And it happens that our company stores everyone's schema in a knowledge graph, and we're like a semantic technology company who understands ontologies and relationships, and that piece underlying, I believe, is going to be sort of the next motion into search, where again it's more about understanding how everything's connected, how everything is understood by machines, not just search, chatbots, anything IoT, and that you'll need to manage that layer. So that's sort of how I'm connected to knowledge graphs. So I employ them and I enable them.
Oh, brilliant stuff. Okay, well, I didn't know you had a knowledge graph yourself. But,
Well,
I like the idea of that kind of knowledge layer, organising, getting
That's right.
relationships and showing them, entities relationships, showing them to Google, and you're into the less structured data.
so at least our clients often have less structured data, so that's kind of where we started. So
Doesn't everybody have?
Well, yeah, indeed. I think often. So sorry, I'm Robin. So
Oh,
I'm
brilliant!
the CEO and co-founder of Similar.ai, and Similar.ai we take unstructured queries that people type into Google and product pages and product catalogs, and often what we see in product pages and catalogs is they're kind of often the things that make people, right? So functionally, you maybe only need certain ways of covering up your body and keeping warm, which are clothing, but clothes are kind of social containers, right? And so this everyday common sense knowledge that is around for clothes or the things bags or shoes, the things you wear on your body, but also for homeware, the things you buy for your house, right? Again, very, very social kind of containers, not purely functional. Yeah. They have this mix of both of those things. And so what we've built is an AI which understands unstructured images and text on product pages and product catalogs, and also understands queries and understands the search intent behind queries and matches those together. And unlike a normal search engine where you take a query and it produces products, we take a product catalog and we translate that into labels or entities in our knowledge graph of everyday products. And we use that as a kind of lingua franca to understand which queries or keywords or categories people are typing into Google, which would be relevant for that retailer's products. And then we help them basically launch category pages about those products and keep them up to date.
Oh, wow. It occurs to me one thing, ontologies is the biggest problem for everybody, isn't it? Actually deciding what the ontologies are. What I've understood, and I might be wrong, is Google Images is now showing the idea of ontologies, and it's showing up. I think it's got 1,000, and they're showing up 200, or they've got 5,000, and they're showing up 1,000. But it's the ones they're sure of, and they're now trying to build AI to extend those ontologies programmatically.
I think of an ontology as the container, right?
Right.
Like, you know, I think more importantly, it's the relationships between things, right? So
Okay.
what you're seeing are like more those entities, and what's becoming interesting are the triples, right?
Yeah.
Like, and literally both of us are speaking about triples, which is like where you actually start identifying the relationship. And like the semantic technology world, it's like, it's not new, right? Like it's sort of becoming more day-to-day conversation in the search world, which is fun and exciting, but
Yeah.
for anyone who's a semantic technologist, like my co-founder, like he'll tell you ontologies have been around, you know, even theoretically, late 90s, like early 2000s, people started applying them more. But what's really fun is the agility that comes with it, and then I would say like also the innate AI
Yeah.
that you can build over it. So, you know, whether you're looking at an e-com or us who build graphs for everybody, the fact that like it's almost like out of the box able to do inferencing and able to do machine learning or AI, like that's sort of innate.
So I studied AI and computer science in the early 1990s when it was mostly philosophy.
Yeah.
Right? And so I still think of myself as basically a philosopher. And actually, the word ontology used to mean the classification of experience or the study of being. So you had epistemology, the study of knowledge, and ontology, the study of being.
Okay.
And nowadays, it's more like a synonym for library sciences.
Yeah.
So how do you classify everyday things,
Yeah.
right? And the ways that you express those classification structures and the way that they overlap and interact, that's the kind of the nature of the ontological languages of say predicates and triples. And how expressive that is and how useful that is at inference time is very important. What you see, you have these kind of twin branches of AI. Originally AI in the, say, 50s and 60s and 70s was almost only symbolic knowledge representation, what we would think of as ontologies today.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we had this explosion in the, originally in the 90s of so-called connectionism at the time, which now became what we know as deep learning. And that machine learning is basically training computers by example rather than giving it step-by-step instructions. And that machine learning by example, deep networks or deep learning networks have been very, very good at being almost at the perceptual layer to structure things that are unstructured. And humans do very well at that perceptual layer and learn by example. But at the same time, humans also have this amazing inference capability. And so deep learning struggles, and lots of people try to solve this, but it struggles with being able to do inference, being able to work out conclusions. And so everyday knowledge and knowledge graphs are this very, very powerful kind of counterpoint. And the two together is what I think is making AI very powerful today as well.
I mean, sorry, what I'm hearing, I mean, it's pretty difficult to build a knowledge graph, and for me the common sense knowledge graph takes it to another level, because that idea of human inference is you're going, I'm going skiing, likely to break my leg because I'm a very bad skier.
It's getting easier. So it's getting easier to build knowledge graphs also because you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So lots of people have built existing knowledge graphs. People tried, there was this amazing AI project, but almost like a startup in last century, but went on for decades, called Psych, so CYC, right? And so it's basically graduate students trying to teach an AI common sense knowledge by writing down rules and expressing them. An enormous rule base, but very, very hard to teach things like milk is white and milk is wet, right? And these kind of really basic components. But what you're seeing is lots of this is getting published. And lots of, not Psych per se, but lots of other ontologies are getting published. Because of the nature of ontologies, they're very interchangeable.
Yeah, they're very flexible.
Yeah.
I think the part that's exciting for me is that, you know, everyone's building knowledge graphs every time they add a property to a Schema.org class.
Yeah.
Using a standard vocabulary that's very flexible and has been defined in order to, you know, populate, you know, those triples and those relationships to build knowledge graphs, right? So, you know, any SEO who's worth their, you know, butter these days is actually like doing semantic technology without knowing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the exciting part, or the fact that, you know, Brett Gifford just opened up the show here saying, you know, like entity management is the future. You know, anyone who studied semantics, you know, is like, what? Like, what just happened to the SEO world? Like, and so I think for me, the bigger piece is that, you know, you can't ignore it if you're an SEO, because you know, we all have to become philosophers. And we always say, like, you know, the first step to doing Schema.org is to be able to ask, like, what is this thing, right?
And that's a really difficult question. I mean, I start writing Schema and I immediately start asking myself lots of questions about what I'm trying to say, how I'm trying to say it, and even in my page, have I said it in an
You're
intelligent
becoming
manner?
a
The answer-
data architect without even knowing it.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
with common sense knowledge in your field, how does structured data
Yes.
function in that?
So I think the curiosity, the interesting fact with common sense knowledge graphs is you got 3 levels of relationships.
Yep.
So you have the common sense of objects, which means you're looking at it like a bike has 2 wheels. That's the internal properties of an object. Then the next one is the common sense of objects, looking at the object-to-object relations. Example, a car is faster than a bike.
Okay.
And the last level is common sense of sequences, looking at the activities, riding a bike, cleaning a bike, parking a bike. So those are the 3 levels of common sense relations. So when you're looking at it from an ontology perspective, you're looking at example from the second tier when you say it's the object-to-object relations.
Okay.
So comparing one thing to the other. Ontology, you can say a car is more expensive than a bike.
Yeah.
So the relationship could be from, I did a bit of research and I came to about 4 types of relationships. You have frequency, you have flow, you have resistance, and you have distance. They're all from graph theory. So example, for frequency, you can say something is always, let's example, your laptop is always close to your phone. You can say, example, the phone and the laptops both run, they have the same OS, so that's frequency. You can have distance. You can say a bike is greener than a car. So from when it comes to an eco-friendly way, there's a distance between a car and a bike, but there's a common sense relations between a car and a bike. You can have resistance. Example, dogs hate fleas. So basically it's a resistance, but there's a common sense relation between dogs and fleas.
Yeah.
So if you're a dog owner, you probably want to avoid an area that has a lot of fleas. So basically, a lot of people are trying to build applications, search engines, dialogue systems to embed this form of knowledge. So the relationship between entities from a common sense perspective is more fine-grained, is more distilled than standard knowledge.
Well, then the question, for me, that begs the question: can you take a knowledge graph and then integrate the common sense elements into that, or is it 2 separate
No,
graphs?
so it's basically having a knowledge graph.
Should we,
No,
should,
it's
we, should we help
Yeah,
understand like?
Help me understand. I'm getting lost.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you
I
want
was
me to go for it? Like,
I go for it.
So the beautiful part about ontologies, so let's go back to like the previous world that any like data person worked in, which was like SQL databases, right?
Yep.
Where anyone who worked in enterprise had to like define the schema, like the actual definition of the database, right? So like what's column 1, what's column 2, right? And then you get IT to implement it, and then like 15 days after you launch, you realize like you need another column, and you have to go through like 6 months of like waiting for IT to like. So the difference with ontologies is it's again these relationships based, right? So it's about sort of defining the relationships between them. So if indeed Dateme is defining the relationships between object to object, and I've already defined the object in my ontology, like I know what a bike is,
Yeah.
then all he has to do is build that new triple and it expands, right? So the beauty around, or I think like why enterprises who understand semantics and ontologies are so excited about it is that the agility it provides. Now it's no joke then that like, you know, Amazon, today I saw like eBay's hiring semantic technologists, Google, you know, are working in this world of like very dynamic data relationships, and that's why, right? Is that a good definition?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I think there's one bit that I think is very powerful in that a lot of people, so databases are very good, so in logic you call it first order logic, so database is very good at stating, I don't know, which things are true or false, or which things are red or blue, or which things are kind of
0 1.
0 or 1, right?
Yeah.
But databases are not very good at expressing opinions. Databases are not very good at expressing that somebody says that, or that this other database says this, but I don't, right? And so, and databases are mostly, traditionally, hidden behind a firewall in a DMZ of a company or something, and they're not out on the internet, right, for various good reasons. But what we're actually doing here is we're publishing data about things, and URI is effectively saying some source says that something is true, or might be true, or might not be true, or other things, right? And that ability means you get a lot more nuance, a lot more expressiveness, but it also means that you can use that statement in your ontology natively, right? So a database cannot easily integrate with another database, and to do that was its enormous consulting project.
Yeah.
Now,
Sorry.
ontologies are a little bit
A little bit more flexible.
Yeah.
They're a lot more flexible, but they're sometimes harder to set up initially because that flexibility is built in. So if you just want to say really, really simple things, and you don't want the nuance like he's saying it, or she's saying it, or that side's saying it, or they might disagree, and there might be all these other things. But mostly people on the web do, because what people are doing on the web is publishing. And when you're publishing things, you're publishing thoughts or statements about the world, right? Yeah. And so ontologies are a way of, and these statements are a way of publishing opinions about the world, which natively are interoperable with all the other opinions about the world, right? And so that means it's a little bit harder at the start, but what it gives you is this amazing benefit is that you can piggyback to infinity and beyond, right?
Yeah, that's Toy Story, isn't it?
That's right.
To come back to the idea of entities, I mean, something attracting me along that line is the idea, you know what a bike is in your common sense, you know what a bike is, and the bike is something that is universal, i.e. a bike is a bike, so these knowledge graphs can relatively easily communicate with each other once they've got the entities and the ontologies right.
That's right.
But nobody agrees about the ontology. Sorry, I'm still a bit stuck on that one. I mean, I don't get the impression that ontologies aren't universal. Everyone seems to have their own set, or am I wrong?
Think of it more of like, I think the vocabularies are trying to standardize more, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, the whole driver behind Schema.org, which, like, the vocabulary's been around since 2011, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not new. Like, the search engines have basically said, like, please use this vocabulary because we all understand it, and goodness me, like, everyone's job is going to be easier if we actually can agree on a vocabulary. I think, you know, what's, you know, across ontologies, like, you use different vocabularies, and you know, depending on, you know, what you're trying to do, like, it'll serve you in different ways. Now, there's a lot of common vocabularies out there, and lots of ways that you can leverage those standards, and most people do, because then that matching up becomes much easier.
Okay, totally good. And sorry, go ahead.
There's lots of there are lots of other applications of, so people, when we talk about ontologies and the semantic web and semantics, then there's especially when we're talking with SEOs, then there's an implicit understanding we're talking about how to publish structured semantic data to the web. But there are lots of ways of using ontologies.
That's right.
And they're increasingly, those are kind of new paradigms of what people call search today, so on-site search or search engines today. Previously that was
Chatbots,
matching chatbots as well, right? So a lot of the problems the people have with search is that when they search is a conversation. When they have a conversation with their search engine, they end up struggling because their search engine is not fluent in the language that they're speaking. And it's less the language, so it's actually the vocabulary, the concepts that underlie that, right? And so for a search engine, be it on-site search or be it many other kind of big search engines that we would all know, then mostly what they're doing is or they were doing 5 years ago, and most of what many are doing today, is they're matching up contiguous strings of text characters. And when you have lots of text that's the same, it's the same thing, right? But it's not the same thing, right? Because these things don't understand things at all, right? So an example would be you go to a fashion retailer, you type in t-shirt bras, so a kind of bra. Maybe you won't be familiar with this one, Jason.
No, I'm not. Are you?
So unfortunately, fortunately, I'm pretty much now an expert on clothing.
On t-shirt bras.
So I'm an ontologist.
Oh yeah, of course, because you work in e-commerce.
Exactly.
Excuse me, so I'm very slow.
It's less I'm an expert on t-shirt bras. This joke will come up many times after. But then it's more that, so I'm an ontologist in the way that I look at the world, be it the world of clothing, which has, much like you were saying, many fine-grained classifications, right? That are super important to the people in those, within those categories and within those domains. And so for people looking for t-shirt bras, they don't want to see t-shirts, right? But for search engines, those are the same things because there's like 7 characters overlap. It's a big similarity. But if you use semantic technology, then you understand when people are looking for t-shirt bras, it would probably be okay to show them other kinds of bras, as an example. Much better than showing them other kinds of t-shirts.
Because there's a very close relationship between the bra and the t-shirt.
You understand it's a child of that parent category, right? And similarly, from the product level, you need to the system needs to understand these things, right? And I'm putting kind of quote marks around understand but it needs to translate them into what they semantically mean, and then match up the intent, right, with the actual meaning. But getting intent is tough, especially just from queries. You have just a tiny bit of text.
Yeah.
It's not a conversation, right? So it can be very, very hard to parse a string of text into what it actually means. But once you've done that, like the hard work is done. Then there's all kinds of amazing discovery and super cool things you can do with it. So that's what this kind of revolution is powering. You do that little bit of work initially, right, and then suddenly, like machines can. It's a level playing field.
It's
right?
the sort of whole thing that I've always been talking about, is like managing your brand for machines. You know, I think this came up in our webinar a year and a half ago, which is, you know, people are still thinking about, you know, helping manage your brand or your products or everything for search. But the fact is that machine understanding is going to be very, very broad, right? And it's really just how do you provide service to your users by truly understanding their intent, right? And then matching that with the idea that you can actually understand information in a much deeper kind of level where you can start to infer things. And I think that's the big change.
When I was a kid, I used to write programs, so I started programming pretty early, and I tried to build machine translation programs, and that was like a fascination for me. And so there's a classic machine translation problem that when these guys in the I guess 70s and 80s, they tried to translate this phrase into Russian and back, and the phrase was the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, right? And it got translated to Russian, and they translated it back, and it came back as the vodka's okay, but the steak is terrible, right? And so the reason for that is they were translating words, right? Yeah. But they had no understanding of concepts. This everyday knowledge, right? So I think of what Similar.ai does. I think of that as translating from how retailers talk about their products to how users search for those products and think about those products. So true. Right?
Yeah,
so you need that everyday knowledge.
From a consulting point of view, I'm constantly telling my clients, stop describing it from your point of view, get some empathy for your clients. And so what you're doing is translating the idiotic presentation that these brands are making because they're looking at it from their point of view, but a solution that would make it much easier for Google and the other machines if we were explaining from the other point of view.
Correct.
I have another question, sorry, just that comes on to that with the idea of granularity. Because the whole thing with, I was talking to Greg Gifford earlier on about local search and the idea that local search and Google Maps is all about entities. So for him, moving to the entity SEO is incredibly simple. And in that sphere, they've got questions and answers about businesses. They've got Google Guides saying, do you know this? They're trying to get that granularity. And in the rest of the web app, how are they going to go about it?
I think it's quite challenging because, like I said, one of the core feature of common sense knowledge is it's very contextual. So certain things in certain cultures will be applicable in certain countries. Example, I'm from Africa. If you sit on the floor to have your lunch or dinner, it's fine. So in terms of granularity, I think it will take a while, but I think it needs to be very contextualized, where what applies to one country might not really apply to a different country. So I think it will take a while to probably focus in maybe in regions or focusing in, could be like topics, rather than trying to do something that applies to every country. Yeah. I think it has to be contextualized. So I think granularity will take a while. I also think WordNet 2 is also a very good tool. And then one of the tools I mentioned in my presentation is called WebChild. So WebChild is a common sense knowledge graph for activities. So what he's done is that he did a PhD. What he's done is just focused on human activities. Because he was like, it's so hard to capture relations in everything. So he was like, so he's focusing on things like riding a bike, activities related to entities. So I think it has to be broken down to either culture, to either a small niche, or it could be activity-based, or it could be a topic-based. Yeah, but it's achievable, but it needs to be split out.
Very, very niche, yeah.
Very niche.
And the problem, I was talking to Dixon Jones about it yesterday, one big problem that we have with Google is it's very America and English language centric. But question there, with entities and ontologies, does it not become language agnostic?
It should be.
That was somebody very disappointed.
Yeah, it can be, right? It can be,
yeah,
but
it can
it's.
But I think if you talk about the nuances, right? You know, like some of those pieces aren't going to be as direct. You know, I think it can be like the granularity. Like to me, my head totally goes to just like solution architecture, right? Like I think when I think of what can we do today. frankly, like just high-level structure is a good starting place,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And because like Google and Watson and other tools like already do a lot of entity extraction, like I think there's ways like that granular piece, which is then like how do you actually do entity extraction definition within blobs of text or within like bigger containers. And I think of, like when you're describing like the description, but then, well, the description contains then these entities and so forth. Like I think there's like all the pieces to the puzzle exist today.
Yeah.
My question is like, does the user have to get that granular, or depending on what, I use the word like service you're trying to provide or problem you're trying to solve, I don't think you'll necessarily have to go super deep. Like it may be okay to
So
like do a container
within the
level.
ontologies, you have a very natural trade-off between expressiveness on the one hand, inferenceability on the other hand as well, and general complexity. So you can make an incredibly nuanced, expressive ontology that has a real richness of ways of comparing things and contrasting things and bringing those and making statements about things. But in many, many, many use cases, it's just simply not necessary, right? And actually, you benefit from making it a little bit simpler. But at some point, you want to be able to do that, right? The question is when and for what, right? So it's still, and it's also like we're starting to see AI that is capable of reading in huge amounts of unstructured text and images and outputting structure and expressing that in a semantic way. So that other people can use that. You talk about kind of the diversity issue within the semantic web, but there's something similar in AI taking unstructured data. There's a lot more unstructured English text on the web than there is unstructured Swahili text on the web, as an example, right? And there might be a lot more English speakers, or there might not, right? For some languages, you have a lot of speakers, but it's not currently online, right? If it's not online, it's very hard for AI to reach that and draw conclusions about that, or people.
Okay,
right?
so I was throwing a rotten criticism that isn't justified.
It's true, but I'm saying it's true across, in many areas, right? Diversity of language.
Yeah.
Languages seem to tend towards monocultures as well, right? A lot of languages drop out and die and are lost forever. So there's a big problem in that people are looking at in linguistics. But then AI that looks at data, if there isn't much data online,
It's hard to learn.
it's
right?
harder to learn, right?
Sure.
So there are people working on those, super cool AI things doing on how you do cross-language learning, but it's a problem that really exists in many areas. It's not just within the semantic web.
Right, I've got another question, because everyone quotes Gary Illis as having said, "We hope one day not to need structured data." How far away are we from that? I think kind of a lot of people in my class go, "I can't be bothered doing the schema markup because it's difficult, it's boring," and it forces them to think about what they're offering.
I have a good opinion on this.
And so they're trying to skip it and say, "Well, I'll just wait until Google catches up."
Yeah, so Gary Ellis and I had this conversation in the hall at State of Search in 2017 after he said that, and I was like, come on, really? He's like, yeah, well, like, I don't know if I'll ever get there, was one of the things he said. However, I think when I think of it as, so Google may not need it.
Good point.
Right? However, like if we believe that websites are going to disappear in 3 years because people are consuming our data through whatever channel we want, right? Through my thermostat, I'm getting information. My fridge is telling me about products, right? My watch is updating me things, or I'm asking voice search while I'm driving. There still needs to be a container for that data.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that the information that I am now perhaps going to license out to people, because GDPR is now looking at sort of like control points for like who can use your data and who owns it. Like you're going to have structured data that these other things are going to be able to consume and understand. And so whether, I like to use the word schema markup because it's disambiguated versus structured data, because structured data can be many different things.
Many things indeed, yeah.
But we're still going to need a way that we can publish our information in a way that can be consumed by multiple entities. And so while like Google might be like, hey, we're getting really smart and so forth, like I as a publisher or consumer, like I'm still gonna want a way to publish my information that is being controlled. So I see it as like a control point for brands.
I think that's an incredibly important point, because people are thinking, maybe I can just leave it out. But in fact, you're saying, I want to control my data, I want to feed it to the entities or the engines and the machines.
Yeah.
And that ties into what Andrea Volpini from WordLift says. You guys appear to completely agree about it. So structuring your data to the people who are watching, incredibly important, whether you think Google needs it or not.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, so there's something that there's folks.
It's good we're in agreement on all.
Right, so I studied AI like 25 years ago, right? And yes, I really am that old. And then my professors at the time, we were working on machine translation. It didn't work, and they said, "Look," and I said at the time, "How long do we have to wait until we have machine translation? Is that actually works?" So as an example, now we have pretty good translation and transcription. We have things that from scratch take 5,000 hours of spoken English and transcribe it into perfect written English.
Okay.
The same network takes 5,000 hours of spoken Chinese and transcribes it into very, very good written Chinese. To understand something deep about language rather than something deep about somebody's trained it on the specifics of Chinese syntax. And that exists today. The professors at the time, they said, look, this is we won't achieve this in the next decade, right? But I don't know whether it's going to take, it's going to be within the next century, but not within the next decade, right? So people typically overestimate what they're going to achieve in the next year or two and underestimate what they're going to do in a decade or a century, right? So, and there's something similar going on with AI as a whole. So some people actually say, well, like AI general intelligence is just around the corner, right?
Yeah.
We are decades away from general intelligence, right? But it's at a century, right? It's at 11 years, don't know, but it's some way away, right? And so in the meantime, narrow intelligence, which is kind of the domains that you were talking about, right? So building something specific for products, or building something specific for how do we do markup for this kind of industry and what is appropriate and useful, incredibly important, because we're shifting to a place where it isn't just a single consumer of this semantic data, but it's peer-to-peer, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be the next decade or the next 2 decades before everybody understands everything without needing any kind of structure.
And you're saying you're in a niche, and you were saying it needs to be niched out because nobody can do it all. I mean, Google.
Although, retail is quite a big niche, right?
Oh, sorry.
But that's true. That's true.
But this actually, like, there's a quote I have from Tim Berners-Lee that talks, like this dream of the semantic web, where you're able to crawl and understand content and its relationships to one another. And that this will enable like our daily lives to be transformed and the daily tasks we do when machines talk to machines, i.e. peer-to-peer, which we're like also already starting to see, right?
Yeah,
and,
totally.
And he said it in 1999 as like his dream. So, we're getting into like the half century to get that done.
Yeah, and
but I think that's interesting as well. Is that I think a lot of us fail to realise that people like Sergey Brin and Tim Berners-Lee as well had this vision.
Absolutely.
20 years ago, and for me, I'm just waking up. Bill Slawski was talking about Sergey Brin having a mini knowledge graph that he was using sci-fi books.
Oh yeah, the technology's been around
in '98, and he was going, "This is where it's going." Sorry, I'm just
I
blown
think
away.
the exciting part is there's application for it now, right?
Yeah.
So like when my co-founder studied in early 2000s, right? Like it was mostly theoretical, and so part of it is like, oh, we have more applications of it outside of, I'll say, like big enterprise, like building sort of, ontologies, or where they're like trying to do semantic first type of thing. So I think that the exciting part is, there's conferences where this is becoming vocabulary that we use that is outside of like perhaps the AI, machine learning or semantic tech.
And even like library sciences, right, and classification systems. So very, very narrow.
Visa is a librarian by training, which is brilliant. So he's perfectly placed. And this has come about incredibly quickly from my point of view. I mean, 2 years ago we weren't talking so much about it.
Well, it depends on your perspective.
It's like a 30-year overnight success.
Yeah. Exactly. Right? Thank you. Yeah, so I was on it. So like we started in the search world, like we've been working with semantics and search since 2013.
Okay.
So the fact that, like there's now a whole track at the conference talking about structured data, like hallelujah, they finally clued in that this is important, right?
Yeah.
So again, like I see it as, like I'm not a very patient person, and I was just like, come on, we're all like, let's.
So I just wasn't paying attention.
I was saying to Martha last night that often you talk about a problem or you talk about a space because you know that this is right, you know this is going to come about, and you're shouting in the desert, and everybody's like, what's the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, when when people start to wake up, it's like a wave, and everybody's like, weren't you talking about this 2 years ago? Isn't this a good idea? And then suddenly it's like,
we were literally pitching this to companies in 2014, and people were staring at me going like this. They were like, what are you talking about? Like, we have no idea. And what's great is like now we circle back and we're like, remember that presentation in 2014 where we said you could be the innovator in this space? Like, guess
And
what?
I mean, all power to you, you managed to get the company to survive this long.
Absolutely.
Because when you're selling
Turns
something,
out I am a patient person.
which is absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. That was great. SEO is AEO. Thank you, Dateme, Martha and Robin.